stuff. All right, First and Second Thessalonians, once again, different issues. Probably the one that I actually forgot on Wednesday. As I was going through those 3 overlapping issues, I remembered 2, forgot the third. John remembered the third. And that's probably what we're going to focus on today, kind of in that vein of Jude. I intended to write to you about this thing. However, this other thing came up. I've talked about that before. I can't remember in what book we were studying. But that's kind of the more the news progressed. It would have been kind of like me overlooking what First and Second Thessalonians is talking about if I didn't at least try to put an additional biblical context to it. And I hope you'll be patient and forgiving because this is completely different than what I was planning to talk about when I left the building on Friday. So this came up pretty quickly. I just did some extra stuff after I left the building, and it started to come together enough that it seemed as though it would potentially work out. So if it doesn't, it just doesn't. But more than anything, your input is welcome, especially with additional references that I'm missing biblically. So anyway, the 3 things we said overlap between First and Second Thessalonians had everything to do with that faith-love distinction, meaning this is basically a prototypical prison epistle, whether or not it is one that he wrote when he was actually locked up. It emphasizes the love at this congregation, and it additionally shows what he can do with love already as a foundation. So that's one of the things that he's going to talk about and emphasize in both First and Second Thessalonians. We talked about that on Wednesday. In addition to the theme of love and faith and love carrying forward between the 2 epistles.
We talked about rejoice evermore and pray without ceasing, and what did those 2 concepts mean?
That's it. Thank you. You're helping me because I'm obviously drawing blanks right now, trying to remember what it was that we talked about in preparation for, what I was planning to talk about in preparation for today. And then, of course, the other, was idleness. He mentioned it briefly in First Thessalonians, but he goes back to it in Second Thessalonians. And on Wednesday night, we said that indicates that sometimes it is in dealing with delicate issues important to broach them delicately. But broaching an issue doesn't always mean it's going to be effectively addressed. And we see this over and over in the 2, we'll call them sequential epistles, meaning First and Second Corinthians and then First and Second Thessalonians. We see issues that he broaches, hoping that it'll be enough, realizing that it needs a more in-depth address. So having dealt with those first 2, faith and love, which is more on the positive side, he's encouraging them and talking to them about consistent things that they have going on that are allowing them, even between First and Second Thessalonians, he's noticing that they're able to do, or that they've improved, even in that area between the writing of the 2 letters. But with regard to idleness, the situation hasn't gotten better, so he goes into a deeper address. We talked about that, but we did not talk about the day of the Lord as much, and that's what I want to focus on today. He talks about the day of the Lord because it seems as though in First Thessalonians, there is some concern about whether or not it is already past or what their attitude should be regardless of the timing of the day of the Lord. That comes up in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. So let's just start out in 1 Thessalonians 4, if someone wants to read 13 through the end of the chapter, which is verse 18.
But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we, which are alive and remain, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words.
And that marks a transition when he says, therefore comfort in your verse, or therefore encourage one another in mine. He's basically dealing with an issue that is, whatever the perspectives they have, it's caused some concern. And so there's some issues that can come up, it can be a discussion, we can just kind of walk away, boom, there's no additional worry. But then there's some that we take home with us. This is an issue in Thessalonica that it seems that some were taking home with them, and therefore Paul wants to address it. And he's not done, because chapter 5, beginning at verse 1, whoever wants to pick up there, he will continue through, maybe through verse 11, is a good place to go.
First Thessalonians.
Yep, 5, beginning at 1, and gone on through 11.
But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then suddenly destruction comes upon them, as they travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. You are all the children of light and the children of day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep in the night, they that be drunken and drunk in the darkness, but let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for the helmet the hope of salvation. For God hath not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by the Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. Wherefore, comfort yourselves together and edify one another, even as also ye do.
All right, once again, we're hearing that same theme. He's emphasizing again. So it sounded to me like at least 3 times he's talking about be encouraged, to be comforted. And so in the admonition to be comforted, why is it so much that they need to be comforted at all? Why would their minds be anxious? What, in terms of timing, does he suggest might cause them some concern?
Well, the second coming, because it says whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him.
There you go. So how does he describe it? It's a famous, almost cliche now that extends from the way he describes the speed of the Lord's coming. He calls it like a thief in the night. And he says, yes, there is a reason to be concerned if you are not prepared, but one of his admonitions is to be ready. And so that's why he's writing. He wants you to be comforted, but he also wants you to do some practical things that play into your comfort. In any skill set, really try not to use sports analogy this early, but comes from a literal player who, Chris Paul. He's an older player in the NBA, and he is famous for his skills. And when asked how he began to perfect them, he said, I have a confidence, but I have a confidence that does not come from simple swagger. Swagger is the term that the kids use now for their, their level of confidence, right? But he says, I developed the confidence that came from preparation. And so that's what Paul in many ways is talking about here. He wants you to be encouraged, but he wants your courage not to come from simply taking courage artificially. He wants it to naturally extend from the fact that you were prepared for what is coming. And so those are the 2 things that he's emphasized. He doesn't want us to be anxious, but he doesn't want us to be, once again, this is another perspective on that whole idleness thing. As opposed to the idleness that he's talking about in terms of day-to-day work, he wants us to emotionally be prepared as people who are ready to see God when he comes, no matter how quickly or when that happens. And so that's a lot of what he's talking about. It's important because, once again, we're talking about a prison epistle where he starts off not trying to fix stuff, but he's encouraging them in the things that they are doing well that they not give up. So he's writing to a church that's doing relatively well, relative to a lot of the congregations he's talking to. And he's still telling them to make sure to be ready, because your comfort, your encouragement is going to come from your level of preparation. And so he's not writing to scare, but he is writing to warn. Okay, so it doesn't seem, once again, like what he wrote in 1 Thessalonians is really going to completely cover it. So he's going to continue this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Thessalonians chapter 2, really beginning at verse 1. At verse 1. For whoever wants to read.
Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by the means for the day that shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. How far do you want me to go?
Oh, I'm sorry. All the way down at least to verse 12, please. And that's a good place to pause. What else do we have as a translation for son of perdition?
I know my NIV had doomed to destruction.
Doomed to, yeah, that's basically another way of saying perdition, right? What else do we have? We have anything else in
What verse is it? I'm sorry.
I don't know where it's verse 3. Were you in verse 3, brother?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter
Chapter 2,
the
2 Thessalonians chapter
okay.
2, verse
I
3.
was in first, and I was like, well, I'm not fine.
No, you're good, you're good.
Okay. So I have another version that's kind of supposed to be an easy to read one, and it says the wicked one who's destined to hell.
That pretty much sums it up. There's another translation I'm obviously looking for. What do you got?
Son of destruction is in this one.
Son of destruction. All right, I'm just gonna cheat. What do you have?
This one's perdition.
A songbook.
Hey. Got him.
I didn't realize I was hiding, but I guess I was.
Oh, well.
I've got an ESV.
That'll work.
And that's 1 Thessalonians 1?
2 Thessalonians 2.
2 Thessalonians 2.
Got him. No, I'm good.
We progressed quickly.
3.
Okay, I had to ask.
3, verse 2, 3.
Yeah.
2, 3.
The man of lawlessness.
There you go. That's another translation. So we got son of perdition, one doomed to hell, and then we've got man of lawlessness, which functionally might help us a little bit more understanding the way this is going to play out throughout things that we've already talked about in the Revelation, Jesus' prophecies, going all the way back to Daniel. That's a term that I've hopefully chosen as one that is more consistent with the way this is going to unfold if it all works out. All right, so we've got two things that are going to happen. First, he said, don't be alarmed because before the end, the falling away is going to happen. And after that, the man of lawlessness or son of perdition is revealed. And since we're already paused, it's probably good to say that term lawlessness, a lot of times I'll go in depth in terms of looking up the definition. It was pretty much straightforward. The most in-depth description I found, I don't remember which definition it was, might have been word studies in the New Testament. I don't think it was them, but it might have been. Talked about it basically not being the absence of a law or destroying all law, but violating any principles that stand in the way of executing one's will. And that's what he's talking about in terms of lawlessness. So think about it practically. How easy is it to manage a completely lawless situation? How well do you do managing anarchy?
As long as I'm bigger than everyone else, it's easy.
But that establishes some sort of order. Because people understand that if your will isn't followed, then there are going to be some consequences, right?
So I think by definition, you can't manage anarchy.
That's it. It's almost, like you said, almost by definition impossible to manage. And so that's what he's talking about. When they defined it, they simply said lawlessness isn't the absence of law. It's not anarchy. It is an individual who is set up exactly in the vein of what you're talking about, establishing a new order as they go along, because there has to be some order for them to be able to rule. And so when he's saying the man of lawlessness, he's not saying, or that's not to be confused with the man of anarchy. There is a law, but it's only by definition going to be one that rotates absent anything that we have known as standard, reliable principles of either God-ordained law or even social contract law or black letter legal from a constitution or any kind of legislation, for lack of a better term, law that descends from that. So he's going to be a man of defiance in terms of lawlessness, not anarchy. All right, so with that, keep going.
Who opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that whether I was yet with you, I told you these things. And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in this time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And then he shall be revealed. Then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonder, and with all the deceitfulness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send his strong delusion, that they should be deceived, that they should believe a lie, that they shall all might be damned who believe not the truth, but have pleasure in unrighteousness.
All right. So some of the things we noticed in the passage about him is, first of all, he's being restrained. And one of the reasons why that is important and connects back to 1 Thessalonians is there is something standing in the way of this revelation. So that goes back to that whole theme of have peace of mind. Have peace of mind in the present time that there is someone greater in authority who's in the way of this being of great power. But don't be so at ease that you don't realize that he is still coming by the power of Satan, right? And so the way this is structured is ultimately says not only is he being restrained, he's going to be revealed, but ultimately he's going to be destroyed. And don't worry, it's not going to take a great world war to destroy him. He's going to be destroyed by
Christ.
But what? Is Christ going to come down and he's going to be like at the final scene of a movie, he's battling the boss, huge sword fight, or big gunfight at the end of a movie? How is Christ supposed to get rid of him?
By his word.
And by the word of his mouth. It's almost like, what kinds of definitions have you all heard for that whole term pneuma, or spirit? It might not be the same concept, same term, but what is pneuma, or what does spirit refer to? Like literally, I just said it. Pneuma refers to spirit. But if you talk about literally what that term pneuma refers to, it is what? Greek word pneuma. Sorry.
Is it breath?
Yeah, it's basically breath, right? so we have this concept that we're seeing brought up again. So when he's talking about the Holy Spirit, it's in some ways literally the holy breath. And so when he's talking about how Jesus is going to get rid of him, it's going to be like, oh, if you can consider that to be a fight, right? But it's very consistent with what we see in the Revelation as well. So when the rider of the white horse, not the one that we're going to get to in Revelation 6, but toward the end of the story, when he's locking up Satan for the 1,000 years, however, whatever your perspective is on that, he basically, by his appearance, once again, great armies assembled, but it's not a great battle. Once again, this is not a fight. When Satan was kicked out of heaven, who kicked him out? Oh, Jesus, it's a big fist fight. Who got rid of Satan? Michael. And Michael's power is not to be diminished or sneezed at, but Jesus didn't get up for that one. Michael was mighty enough to get rid of Satan. So when Jesus has to actually do it himself, this is what we're starting to see. This is how much effort goes into his resolution of the issue. So that goes back to that whole concept of whoever's restraining it, he's going to be destroyed. It's not going to be much of a fight. And so when we're getting back to this whole concept of being encouraged, it is understanding the power of the adversary. So that leaves the question, okay, so why is it allowed to build up in this way? That part I can't necessarily answer, but let's keep going and see if we can piece together possibly some of the reasons, even if we don't get a definitive answer. Okay, what exactly does he say about the power of Satan that is going to bring about this person or man of lawlessness? What are the signs or what are the things that they're going to endorse? It's kind of like the Holy Spirit endorsed the word of the apostles. What is going to add to the persuasiveness of this man of lawlessness?
All deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish because they receive not the love of truth.
Amen. Go ahead.
Signs and lying wonders.
There you go. So backing up to verse 9, do you guys have power first?
Yeah,
Okay,
power.
signs and lying wonders.
So we got power. Got false signs. Probably should be false signs and false wonders. I'm going to interpret it that way for now. And with wicked deception. As my handwriting gets ever better down towards the bottom of the board. All right, so with that, trying to apply it to the times, okay? Understand that when we went through the Revelation, we talked about one of the things that the Revelation talks about much is sequence. What it doesn't talk about much is actual timing. So there's the possibility that when you're looking at seals being opened, the seventh seal opening up to 7 trumpets, it doesn't necessarily tell us that each one, even sequentially, is going to follow the latter, or the previous, as much as we know these events are all going to take place, and it is possible because he doesn't give us a specific idea of time, that some of these events overlap with regard to time. So understanding that, if you had to say, okay, well, if we are looking at just the times today, what things are potentially already at work by what Paul has described in 2 Thessalonians as signs of the activity of lawlessness or the evil one, of those 4? Power of Satan, false signs and wonders, wicked deception. What things seem like they are already at work in the world that we live in today?
Basically, it's false teachings.
Well, we got wicked deception at least, right?
Yeah.
Seems for sure.
And God's gonna send strong delusions for those that believe that.
Go ahead. We'll talk about strong delusions.
And it says, those who don't believe the truth are gonna be damned,
Yeah, go ahead.
and they have pleasures in their unrighteousness.
probably not going to pause too much, but if that's a place where you all want to pause, then strong illusions is a place where we'll pause. So I think you've hit on two that are actually pretty clearly at work now. And so the reason being is I don't think we get to this time in the world or America if we don't have at least one faction of the nation pointing to the other and being like, you're completely deluded because this is how it is, right? And so part of once we get to, and now we're going to the Revelation, is before we get there, who remembers the four horsemen? We got
It's white,
exactly white horse,
black, and pale.
white, red, black, and pale. But that's really good. If I could spell. All right, what do they represent? What do they represent? What do they represent? White horse represents. We should probably skip ahead and read. I don't want to get it too out of order.
Number one was disease, one was pestilence, but I don't remember which is which.
Disease and pestilence, if I'm not mistaken, is death and Hades. It's the pale horse. No, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You said, what did you say again? I'm sorry. What did you said? Pestilence and...
So like disease.
Yeah, that's it. Pestilence is disease. That's the red horse, if I'm not mistaken. Is the rider with the sword who is... No, we're just going to have to read it. No, I think that is it. We'll switch it if I got it wrong. But it's going to be able to kill with the power of the sword, famine, pestilence, and wild animal. All right, who remembers what the black horse was? Black horse was red or white? Any one of them? Understand? I might have to change this if I got the red and the pale messed up. I think I got that one. Are we already skipping that? We can skip that and go back then. All right, who just wants to read the four horsemen of the apocalypse from Revelation chapter 6? Anyone, beginning at verse 1.
Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he came out conquering and to conquer.
Amen. Go ahead, keep going.
When he
Go ahead.
opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword.
Go ahead. Thank you.
When he opened the third seal, I heard the living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine."
All right. Do me a favor and pause there. Does anybody have a footnote for a denarius?
A day's wage for a laborer.
There you go. And what are we paying a day's wage for now in the Revelation? Quarter wheat and
Measure barley.
3 measures of barley is yours, or yours says 1 or 3?
It just says barley.
Barley, okay. Some say 3, whatever the measures are.
I've got 3.
3, yeah. And so going back, it's been a while since I've done the Revelation. Go back and see how much you're working for in terms of an entire day's day's wage. It sounds like if we're just talking about bread, maybe enough to feed a family just on bread. But we're used to eating meat, right? And so what it looks like he's talking about in terms of just measuring from your own standard of living. Understanding what he's talking about, it sounds like a common term for come on, we talked about it in private. Before it actually even started hitting, we were talking about it. Looks like he's talking about what? Inflation, right? Okay. All right, let's keep going. Pale horse.
When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. And Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth.
All right, so there it goes. And so let's work our way backward. One of the reasons why I stopped ignoring the news was just piecing this out, realizing how much of this was in 1 Thessalonians. It's like I'm really ignoring it if I don't look at it. So I started to look at it. And then it started to kind of tick boxes from what I remembered in our discussion of the Revelation. And so if we're looking at the way things are playing out in the Ukraine, first thing to keep in mind is be encouraged, right? This is probably not the way it's going to end. Even if the man of lawlessness is revealed, the way he's going to be dealt with isn't going to be through a world war. The thing to be concerned about is, as we talked about as we went through Revelation, what do these times suggest for how we should alter our perspective as God's people? And so one of the things that got my attention, I ignored it probably 2 or 3 times before I started paying attention to it, was Putin's threat to, or implied threat to use nuclear weapons. Now, Sun Tzu, I quote him all the time, he says, when you're weak, you feign strength, and when you're strong, you can conceal that. You don't really have to say anything. It could be the biggest bluff in world history. The world survived the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? But the bottom line is there is some generation that is going to have to deal with a level of catastrophe that is going to begin to, even if it's not killing a quarter of the population, it is going to have the authority over a third of the population, a fourth of the population, because a third is the term it's going to use when we get to the trumpets. With sword, a combination of sword, famine, pestilence, and wild animal. And the reason why that is difficult to interpret is, doesn't mean we have to have a huge nuclear conflict that takes a fourth of mankind, and that's the sign we're looking for. No, this fourth of mankind is under the authority of death in these 4 different ways. And so if we are actually paying attention, what we're paying attention to is the way that sword fits into the death that is prophesied in the Revelation. And so if we're talking about, once again, let's take a pause to talk about the role of these different factors in the world today. If you had to say, okay, are famine, pestilence, wild animal, or sword a thing in our modern times or our recent history? What would you say, yeah? And then what actual events would you attach them to?
I'm sorry, what are you asking?
Are sword, famine, pestilence, and wild animals something that our kids and their kids need to worry about? Or is that something that at least are we seeing, and I should have brought this illustration. There is a, can't remember where it is, but biblically, not even biblically, practically, there are earthquakes and there are, before an earthquake you can have a tremor. Exactly. Is a tremor the earthquake? Is it the same thing as earthquake, or is it a warning about the earthquake?
Usually it's free.
It's free, right? So it's a warning that an earthquake could be coming, right? Okay. We talked about the way that you have to reconcile all of these prophecies with the fact that Jesus said, and Paul said, it's going to come like a thief in the night. So how are all of these catastrophes going to unfold in a way that surprise people? How does that even work? How is that possible?
I mean, we've had to deal with this stuff for as long as history goes back, and we're still dealing with it, and it's,
Kind of just level.
I mean, it
Prophetically, what does it say it's going to eventually do? Eventually, it's going to just kind of go away and get better, or what's going to happen?
Well, it's going away.
What's going away?
All the ups and downs and stuff that it does, because God's gonna come back and he's gonna take care of it.
But before God comes back, something's restraining him. What's going to happen before God gets back? Is it going to get worse before he comes and saves us? If we needed...
You know, these four curses are referred to as the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah. So ultimately, if we're talking about, okay, if you're trying to buy a stock or sell a stock, you're trying to know whether it's trending up or trending down, right? Prophetically, the Bible says, even though these things have seemed like they've taken on for a while, he says this earth is trending what? Up or down, if you're buying as a stock or looking to buy or sell. It's trending up. The world is? Or in its present condition?
No, what I'm talking about
Yeah.
is the things that are going on then.
Yeah.
It says they're gonna go ahead and come back in the future.
Yeah.
It's not going away permanently.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So, we know that God's gonna stop it for a while, but then it's gonna return.
What's going to return? I'm sorry. Jesus or the times? What?
The times.
Okay. And when you say the times are going to return, what do you mean? You mean he's making a new heaven and a new earth, right?
Well, what I'm talking about is the false teachings of prophets and things like that are gonna come back, was my understanding.
Okay, so this is all, the world as you know it is trending up or trending down.
Well, it's trending down right now.
There you go. Right.
But I mean, it's going down, and then it's going away for a little bit, then it's coming back, and till Jesus comes, I think. That's kind of what I got.
It's similar. Let's skip ahead and read Revelation 13. Then. Let's read Revelation 13. Revelation 13. And let's skip past the part of the first beast, because one of the things, this is as a way of tracking consistency between what we've already read in 2 Thessalonians in this particular chapter.
So what are you wanting read, 13 part of it?
No, hold on, I'm still just setting it up. We have the woman and the dragon in verse 12, or sorry, in chapter 12 of the Revelation. And what's going to happen is the dragon, much like Paul specifically says in 2 Thessalonians, is going to give his power to the beast in Revelation 13. So let's just start there with Revelation 13 verses, let's just say 1 through 4.
Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. On each of its horns there was a crown, and on each of its heads there was a man that was insulting to God. The beast looked like a leopard, with feet like a bear's feet, and a mouth like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave the beast his own power, his throne, and his vast authority.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, please read that again. The dragon did what?
Gave the beast his own power, his throne, and his vast authority.
Okay, that seems clearly connected to what we heard Paul describe in 2 Thessalonians, right? At least in terms of who did the man of lawlessness come in the power of? Satan, exactly. Okay, if we back up to verse 9 of chapter 12, and the great dragon was thrown down, and that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So when it's talking about the dragon, make no mistake, the interpreter here is literally saying that the dragon and Satan are one and the same. And so now we're seeing the dragon in chapter 12 giving his power to the beast. Does not allow us to say that the beast and the man of lawlessness are the same person, but they are both being empowered by the work of Satan, looking at the prophecy given to John and the words that we have from Paul. Okay, sorry. Please go ahead. I think you left off in verse 3.
Okay, what part do you want me to read? Sorry.
Please go down to verse 4.
Okay. dragon because he had given his authority to the beast. They worshipped the beast also, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?"
All right. And so here we have the dragon, the enemy. And when Paul writes to the church at Ephesus, he says, our battle is not against who?
Flesh and blood,
Not against flesh and blood, but it's against what?
principalities and powers.
In the spiritual realm, right? And so what we're seeing here in the Revelation is a spiritual being, the dragon, giving his agency to a beast. And what is the result of him giving his agency to the beast?
They were speaking great blasphemies and was given power to continue for like 42 months.
What does it specifically say the result is, though, in verse 4? In verse 4, how did it affect worship? How did it affect the whole concept of worship in verse 4?
They worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him?"
Back up the whole verse, please.
And they worshiped the dragon who gave power unto the beast.
All right, so they worship who?
Satan.
All right. And so ultimately what's going on is Satan is using a physical manifestation of power to attract worship to himself, right? And from the very beginning, his issue has been with God. If you go back to the prophecies against the king of Tyre, he talks about whether or not that's actually talking about Satan. Or there's certain prophecies, I think it's also in Isaiah, that talks about you were the perfect signet of beauty in many ways, right? Until you fell. And so one of the things that caused him to fall, it says, is he said that he will ascend to the heights and exalt his throne to, I guess, equality or superiority over God. And so now we're seeing after thousands of years have passed, the prophets have made their prophecies. Jesus is letting John know, Jesus is letting Paul know that ultimately what's going on in all of these things is a spiritual force that is using people to gain the worship that he always wanted. Now, why is that important? Why is that important? First of all, let's look at what he gives to the beast. The dragon gives to the beast his power, his throne, and his authority. It's the difference between a throne and a throne and authority. It's the difference between a throne and authority.
A throne is something to sit on, and the other is something to exercise.
Right? I can sit on a throne all day, but if I don't have authority, what's going on? What's it?
Yeah, I mean, the throne is a symbol of power. Authority is actual exercising.
Gotcha. We got a Queen of England, right? She has some authority, but how much? There you go. And so when you unite the throne and the authority, now you've got something. Because you've got a figurehead who has the ability to make things happen. And so now if we go back to what we are looking at today, we are looking at an individual in Putin going over across Ukraine's border. He is not only the authority, he is he's the throne. He is the face of that nation. And so ultimately, the reason why that caught my attention is if we go back to the rider on the white horse, is he the only rider on a white horse that we actually see in the Revelation? I'm just going to draw this down because we're going to skip it, but the beast is also going to work in tandem with the false prophet. Is the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6 the only rider on the white horse we're going to see?
No, there's one just up later. I just started to prepare. 1911.
There you go. There you go. If you want to go ahead and read 1911 through maybe, we don't need that much. Through 16, maybe?
16?
Yeah. All right.
Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. And he has a name written that no one knows but himself. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and and the name by which he is called is the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp-edged sword, with which to strike down the nations. And he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God, the Almighty. On his robe and on his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
All right, so what do we know about this rider on the white horse in Revelation 19? Character-wise. Let's just focus on character-wise.
He's faithful and true.
Faithful and true. How does he rule? Right, faithful and true.
In righteousness, he judges and makes war.
In righteousness, he both judges and makes war. Now, this is perplexing to me in Revelation 6. I was like, well, how do we distinguish the Revelation 6 rider on the white horse from the Revelation 19 rider on the white horse? Well, he goes into more detail. One carries a bow, one has a sword that extends from his mouth. I know that much, but he could be the same guy because he could have both a sword and a bow, just at different times. But what else do we notice that may distinguish the rider on the white horse in chapter 19 from the rider on the white horse in chapter 6?
Chapter 6 seems only to conquer, which really just gives the impression of a marauder. He's not one who comes and establishes authority to rule and to increase power.
That's it. He is simply conquering. And so now if we start to make connections, since we're running out of time, it's probably a good time to start making connections. One more thing that we're going to have to kind of cut corners on is, I'm going to put over here, 1 John. 1 John also talks about, just from memory, what does it talk about in terms of end times things, if you all remember? It says there's also going to be a falling away, for lack of a better term, but it's going to describe a, let's just go ahead and read it real quick, and then I'll try to piece everything together. 1 John chapter 2, please. No, it's chapter 2. Beginning of verse 18, verses 18 through 21, please.
Little children, it is the last time. As ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us. But ye have an unction from the Holy One, that ye know all things. I have not written unto you because ye know not the truth, but because ye know it, and no lie is of the truth.
And I made a mistake. Down to verse 22, please.
Who is a liar, but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son.
Okay, so what are the characteristics of Antichrist there?
Denying Jesus.
And
Denying the Father and the Son.
the Father and the Son. Okay, so that should make it at least a little bit more obvious why I'm starting to piece all of this together. All right, what we have is a situation where if we look at this whole concept of idol conquest, and we piece that term in Revelation 6 back to what Paul is going to say around where we're at here in 2 Thessalonians. Good night. The one thing that Jeremiah mentioned was that the one distinction that we saw clearly, between the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6 and the Revelation 19 white horse rider was the fact that the rider on the white horse in Revelation 19, he was constrained by what? Being faithful, being honest, and being righteous. So he had limits on his reality, right? His rule was limited by truth, righteousness, and faithfulness. There, as we saw in Revelation 6, there's not necessarily any limit whatsoever on the role given to the rider on the white horse there, which ties back to where we are in 2 Thessalonians. When he's talking about a person of lawlessness, once again, that ties into Revelation 13. When we're talking about the dragon, if you continue on where we did not have a place to read, we didn't have time to read, the false prophet is one who simply commands that everyone worship the beast. And what was the condition under which refusal to take the mark? What were the conditions of refusing to take the mark of the beast? One of the more famous passages or parts of the Revelation. Those who refused to take the mark were not allowed to either buy or sell, right? And so what we see in a lot of ways is a progression. We see a progression in terms of this whole concept of conquest, going back to lawlessness, going back to this whole issue of power as a predecessor for the moment where power is so complete that you are able to basically restrict people's ability to do basic business. When they needed their power or the internet restored in Ukraine this week, who did they call to restore the internet? Who did they call to restore the internet? Did they call us? Were we able to do it? I understand. They called Elon Musk. And so what's one of the effects of what has happened during COVID? Of course, back check all this. We'll talk about it later if any of it's wrong. What's been the effect of what we've seen during COVID? Have we seen power dispersed or concentrated? Yeah, it's been concentrated. And so now it's not just wealth. When a nation is under attack, the people used to call America for help. One of the things that Zelensky has lamented is the fact that his Western allies have abandoned him. And now if he needs to just restore basic things like internet service, he's calling up a guy as opposed to an entire nation to get his people basic services. And so when we're looking forward to a time as Christians, when it's saying there is going to be a power that has the ability to stop you from buying or selling if you don't get the mark, the reason why the events that are taking place right now is, we talked about the distinction between tremors and earthquakes. We are looking at a time where we don't know whether the rumblings, which really are taking the shape of each and every one of the things we saw in Revelation 6, a white horse with a rider conquering the conquerors, we've already talked about. The whole concept of taking peace from the earth. Just check the headlines. The inflation. We started talking about it before it started happening. And the questions that folks have been raising even before the invasion, even if we don't get involved militarily, what is this likely to do with that whole issue of price inflation if all you're doing is even just using sanctions to try to get a point across to a power as big as Russia? Have we heard from China yet? Do we know what China's position is in this conflict?
They didn't join in the veto. Only Russia.
They've been pretty quiet.
But the question is, depending upon what stance they take, what is that also likely to do to this whole issue of economic stability? See, it's a huge question mark. Sorry, come on, y'all. It's good to see you again. It's time for me to quit. I should have quit a while ago. We will use this as a to be continued since we have visitors stepping through. Thanks for coming back, y'all.
Yeah, of course.
And we'll pick it up. But we were talking about current events in light of where we are right now, which is 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, putting it in context with things we studied before from Revelation 6 and Revelation 13 and also 1 John. Talking about why Christians need to be encouraged in these times, but also to be ready for times as they change. Those are the two things that Paul emphasizes in 1 Thessalonians. He develops it in 2 Thessalonians, and it relates to what we've heard John write in the Revelation in both his first epistle. And so that's what we tried to do today, is to put a little bit of literal context to what we should think about things that are going on in the news right now. Didn't have time to finish, but hopefully we can pick it up and tie a tidier bow on it maybe in the future. So that's where we're at. All right, there we go.
Sounds great.
All right, y'all. Thank you for being patient. And kind of got the streets set up already.